In this video, we'll briefly discuss the communication bus architecture in a first-generation 2005 Mini Cooper. We'll discuss various ways this system can fail, and we'll work through a real-world diagnosis and repair of a Mini Cooper that will not communicate with a scan tool. Good morning. Well, I've been spinning wrenches all my life, but workup of communication problems has always seemed like a bit of a mystery. Last month, my son phoned, and he said that he has an intermittent check engine light on his 2005 Mini Cooper. He has no drivability issues at all, but he asked me what was the problem. And so he brought the car over, and to my surprise, I can't get diagnostic codes on any of my 3 scan tools. Let's see if we can fix it. Well, I started out approaching the problem the same way most people would. I quickly and systematically surveyed all the fuses in both fuse boxes looking for a clue. Indeed, I did find a blown 5-amp fuse, fuse 41. 41 feeds the cooling fan for the power steering, and replacing it made no difference. When I booted up the scan tool, it took a long time, and then I get this message. After that, it begins to interrogate the modules one at a time, and I ended up with this report. What's most intriguing is what we don't see. There's no main computer in this list, no ABS, and no power steering module. Now have a look at this from the dealer repair manual. This is a schematic blueprint for bus communication in the Mini. You can see that there are 4 different and separate communication pathways. I've made a green tick mark on the modules that are communicating. So evidently the K-bus communication pathway is intact, but look what's missing. I put red X's on the modules that don't seem to be there. Also notice that what they call the GIU is a transmission control module for the automatic and CVT transmissions. That module is not present in the manual transmission car we're working on today. I think you'll agree that just based on the modules that are out, we've got a problem with either the D-bus pathway shown in blue or the CAN-bus pathway shown in green. But remember that this vehicle drives perfectly fine, which is not what you'd expect for a CAN-bus problem. So right out the gate, I'm pretty sure there's something taking down the D-bus line. The next thing I did was to hook up a breakout box to the data link connector. Right away you'll see that the unit has power and ground as shown by the 2 ground connections 4 and 5 and the power on pin 16. Those 2 grounds are identical and there's no voltage drop even when the engine is running. When I boot up my scan tool and watch for activity, I find data activity on pin 8, which is the DS2 protocol, and pin 9, which links to the computer, but there was no consistent talk on the D-bus, pin 7. Now here's a pinout diagram for the DLC on the left. I'll zoom in for a better look. Now let's clean this up by getting rid of those modules that aren't present in this base version of the Mini. You can see that all the action happens on 3 pins, pins 7, 8, and 9. What we want to focus on is the violet wire with a white stripe coming off pin 7, the diagnostic bus line. You might wonder, where's the CAN bus on the DLC? Shouldn't you have access to that through pins 14 and 6? Now remember, this car was made in 2004. It predates the conventions to link to the CAN bus through the DLC. Now the D-bus is a class 2 serial communication wire that gets power from each individual module, operating on a 12-volt scale. So even though the line is designed for 12 volts, it normally carries minuscule current because there's no direct connection to ground. The tricky thing is that if the line is shorted somewhere, you'll have more current than those tiny wires and electronics can handle. So if you apply voltage, it's very important to limit your current somehow. The way I did that was by routing the voltage through my 170 milliamp test light. The next logical thing to do is to use the scope on pin 7 and look for an open, a short to ground, a short to battery positive, or a messy signal. With key on, engine off, while the scan tool is working, I get 0 volts on that line. Truthfully, you can use a multimeter for this as well, but dynamic testing, where you get electrons flowing, is always going to be more accurate. Here's what I did. I hooked up my power probe with its voltmeter, switch, and fuse in series with my test light, and the end of the light is tied into the bus. Notice that when you do this, you can use the voltage drop across the test light to estimate resistance downstream. A normal response for this kind of bus would be no current flowing, since the test light should not light up, and the voltage readings on the power probe should be the same as on the scope. But if a low resistance short to ground is present, the light glows, and the scope shows low voltage, illustrating that the entire voltage drop occurs across the test light. So let's look at what a normal bus will react to. I'll hook up the power probe through the test light, so the test light is limiting my current. And when I hit the power probe, I'm going to hit it with 12 volts and watch what happens to the test light. And notice the test light doesn't light, and we get 12 volts on the oscilloscope. Okay, now let's do the same test on pin number 7, circuit number 7. So we'll check our voltage here, 0.02 volts, and we've got a ground there. And when we apply 12 volts, Whoa, 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 stop it. Freeze it right there. I only did this for a couple of seconds, but we need to talk about what just happened. You should pause the video now and think about what the diagnosis is. The clues are on the screen. The first clue was the green tone of a ground on the bus line. That's not usually the case. I've applied 12 volts, we've got current flowing through the test light making it glow, and we've got no residual voltage spilling through to the data line. All the voltage drop is eaten up at the test light. What's the diagnosis? Yeah, we've got a short to ground on the D bus line. Well, here's a schematic of the D bus line, and it's also why I hate working on European cars. The devices on the line are the computer, the ABS unit, the electro-hydraulic steering module, and the data link connector. The car's a manual, so there's no transmission module, and these other two are variants of the ABS that the car doesn't have. If the 3,500-page BMW dealer's repair manual had been kind enough to tell us where this central splice is, it would have saved a lot of time on this repair. But those details are absent. Failing that, the usual approach in this situation is to disconnect one module at a time and look to see if the short to ground persists. I'm going to start on the engine computer first, if only because a fault there would have been a fatal flaw in a 14-year-old car. All right, now I want to be able to lift the ECM up just a little bit, and so there are a couple of tabs here. I'm going to point out one to you right there. You see the end of my screwdriver? Right at that spot. We're going to push that in. There's one on this side and one on the other end. It's hard to get a good tripod placement here, but this tab right here, this pulls right out like so. This is the locking tab. There. I'll do that same thing on the other side. There. All right, let's do this again. This time the computer's out of the equation. The ECU is removed. I had to hook up the battery again just so that I can do this test. But we'll check it here. 0 volts, and then apply 12 volts. And this red light still lights. We still have a short to ground even with the ECU removed. Okay, now my next step is to see if the ABS unit is somehow responsible. So we're going to do the same thing with the ABS. Now the tricky thing is it's hard to get at. That's the connector right there. And there's a single bolt here. That'll give me a little bit of extra access. I'll disconnect the negative pole of the battery and we'll get at that now. Well, we'll see if I can do this one-handed. I use a universal joint to undo this nut. It's 10 millimeters. And then this thing comes up. Let's see if we can lift it up. Oh yeah, it flips up there. Not enough though. I'm going to have to put the camera down and use two hands to try and get at this. This ABS unit is not very mobile. There, it was pretty stuck. It just took a little bit of muscle wiggling and pushing, and I got this thing right up. And then now it's just, again, I'll have to put the camera down to take this off square. Okay, ABS is removed. I wondered if it might look a little sticky down there, but no, not sure. Let's do the same test again. Okay, well, my first strategy to disconnect one module at a time and see when the fault is resolved has failed because it doesn't seem to be any of the modules. I guess that's good news because it means I don't have to buy a module or worry about programming, but bad news because I don't know where to start. It's a needle in a haystack now. Now, when you look at how experienced technicians solve problems like this, guys like Eric O with South Main Auto or Eric from Advanced Level Automotives, they usually use their experience to start at a corner of the problem, and then they start peeling that back to see if it'll take them to a solution. In this case, I don't know where that central connector is. That'd be an ideal place to start, but I don't know where it is. So what I'm going to do instead of that is I'm going to start at the data link connector, and I'm going to follow those wires back and see if I find any problems. All right, the data link connector is under here. You just take your thumb and pry that down, and that's it right there. And we need to get this panel off. This is the pillar A fuse box, and we pull out this little tab and then take a pry bar, peel off this weather stripping, and then just peel this back. So I'm going to get this out of the way. To get this plastic panel right off, you need to undo this seat belt. This is a T-Torx Torx. We'll just undo that now. Here's what this thing looks like from the back side. White clips. Those ones are here are still in the car. You just come right off. Now, to get this plastic panel off, the newer models have 3 screws at the bottom that you undo, usually torque screws, but this one doesn't. I've taken off this side panel here, and you can see deep in there, when I pry this, look at that little slide right there. Watch what happens when I pry it out. It just pops off from the top. Yeah, this thing just pops down like so. There's that one tab, and there's another one right here. There's these 3 things here. Alright, I think I found the problem here. It's this connector right here, and I broke off those white tabs accidentally when I was taking it apart, even though I was really careful. I'll just put the camera down, and I'll show you what I've got here. Let me take this apart. We've got the green crusties going on here. Okay, the camera's in a little better position. So if you look here, look at that. Green crusties. So I'm hoping that our short is right here at this connector. You can see the same thing inside there. Now, is our problem solved? Well, our short to ground is gone. Notice no tone. But that doesn't mean anything because we've disconnected it at the wire. So we know the short to ground is not here, but it could be on this end here. And so I'm going to have to trace that wire back and see if I can check for a short to ground on the other side of this connector. There's a little hook there. I slid that back. And now let's just take this off here, like so. And then here's our wires. So I'm going to tease that back and find the wire we're looking for. Now this is really delicate. I'm using this little seamstress tool, and it's a little V-shaped thing that the idea is to reduce the chance of nicking a wire as we're tearing this apart. Okay, now this thing, this little white tab, just take the pocket screwdriver and slide this thing back. There, the little tab comes off, and then we can get this out like so. Well, dang, my battery died last night, and so I'm going to reproduce what I did. Basically, what I showed yesterday was that my problem was on the distal side of the connector here, and the side closest to the data link connector is fine. And so I thought I was on camera, but the battery died and I wasn't able to reproduce it. But basically what I did is I depinned this particular terminal, which is number 15 here. And this is the one for the circuit, the class 2 circuit. And so what I want to do at this point is show you how I prove that the short to ground persists. So I use the same setup, and if you look here, we still have ground, and when I apply power, you can see it's a definite short to ground. And so as much as I wanted to blame this on this connector, there's a lot of corrosion here. That's not our problem. Our problem must be on, so I'm going to have to trace this wire down further. It looks like this cable here goes behind the box, so I'm going to take the box off, have a look behind it. The hidden bolt right here. Ah, look what I found under here. Let me show you this. I sure hope this is the cause of the problem, because it definitely needs to be fixed. Look at that rubbing. The battery box was rubbing on the bottom of this wiring harness. So that's battery positive there. Man, I hope this isn't another wild goose chase, but in any case, I need to fix this regardless. Well, both these seem to go to the starter motor, so although they're not the cause of the problem, I need to fix it. I could replace the line, but I don't want to take my eyes off the ball at the moment. And so I'm just going to clean it off, put on some liquid tape, tape it all up properly. I'm sure many would just replace the wire, but this will work just as well, and it's not the cause of our problem. All right, so I found a connector, this one right here, this round one, just over the left headlight, and it seems to have that violet with a white stripe wire on it. And so I'm checking for continuity. I've disconnected it, and I'm going to check both ends. I've back probed first the engine side, and I've got the other wire hooked up to the loose wire that's in at the left driver's knee, and we've got no continuity there. So let's back probe the other side of this connector. Okay, it was a little loose to do it back probing, so I'm going to do it front probing. And let me show you here. Of course, this is a lot finer wire than the connector, so I'm not going to spread the connections. And we've got 1.6 ohms, so this is the side. That's the side of the connector. Now let's see if we've got a short to ground here. So I've got the battery removed, so I can't do it the way I was doing it before with dynamic testing, but I'll just try it on with the continuity tester. So we're just checking that same pin, front probing, just because I couldn't get a good connection with back probe, and I get 2.4 million ohms, so that's not much of a short to ground there. Let's try the other side. And here I've back probed the other side of that connector, and I'm just doing continuity testing, and look what I've got, 2 ohms. So we know that my short to ground is on this side of this connector, which is a convenient thing, because it means I don't have to tear into the firewall or do much in the way of further dissection at that pillar A inside the cab. Well, finally, I think I've found the solution. You recall that I got to this connector and found that the problem's on this side of it. This side was okay. And so I traced this back to a central juncture here. And then from there, I noticed that the electrohydraulic power steering has to be routed down here. And I noticed that there was a cluster of 4 wires coming in behind this pipe right here, which you can see me move it. That pipe is the return line for the heater core. And it was pinched, it was bolted in against these wires and pinching them against the side of the engine. And of course, as the engine goes through its heat cycles, it damages the wires. Well, look what's happened. The 4 wires were there. One is the starter motor actuator. That seems to be okay. The second was the oil pressure switch. The third was the fan for the electrohydraulic power steering. That's this one, and that seems okay. But look at this one here. I don't know if you can see this. This is this data line right here, this purple line with a white stripe, and you can see that it's actually broken. It's melted in half. And when I pulled it out, I think I completed the open, but I think what had happened is it melted in half and was pressed up against the side of the engine, creating a short to ground. And so now the solution is just to put in a little splice here, solder it all together, wrap it up carefully so it doesn't happen again, and carefully reroute the wires so that they don't get close to the heater core or exhaust manifold. Let's get cracking. Number 1 rule of soldering, never forget the condom. I love this soldering iron by PowerPro because it's so fast. I'm going to smear a little bit of dielectric grease on this just to try and keep it as clear of corrosion and water later as I can. And then the heat shrink. Okay, at this point I was really careful. You could fault me for not replacing this wire. I individually wrapped them after the liquid tape had dried, and then I wrapped them 2 together, and then I've zip tied them. And I think I've tied them in such a way that they're less likely to rub in the future. Same thing with these. And so we're going to get it back together again. I've got that heat shield back into place on the back, and it looks like it's in a pretty good situation here. Well, in retrospect, the key was this connector right here, which allowed me to divide the problem into 2, so I'd know which side to chase, and that saved a lot of time. You would have thought that with 3,400 pages of dealer service manual, they would have mentioned this connector, but there's no reference to this connector in the dealer service manual that I can find anyway. The way these go together, these 2 arrows come together like this. and then you twist. Let's see if I can do that. There we are. That spray I put on there is dielectric grease, designed for electrical connections to try and exclude water. And I'll put this part on too. Interestingly, this end is missing, and so this has been touched before. This car has been worked on before, and I wonder what they did with it, but in any case, the repair is done now. This is the fan for the power steering. It's a vulnerable point in the BMW Minis because it's so exposed to weather. And you get a green light if you've got a continuous circuit. I've got it hooked up to a 12-volt battery, and the fan works fine. You could hook it up to an oscilloscope if it's got some dead spots, but this will be good, so I'm going to put it back onto the car now. These are 13 millimeter. Here we are back in the driver's seat. I've cleaned this whole area with deoxit, and I think on looking at it, seeing as it wasn't the cause of the problem, I'm just going to put it back together and see if it works. We could replace this connector, but at this point I don't think it's necessary. Now that we've found and dealt with the short, let's do the same test again. We've got the power probe hooked through the test light, and remember before it lit, showing that significant current was going through. This time, no current going through there. So the short to ground is now solved. All right, for this next bit, I'm going to boot up the scan tool, and we'll see if we get activity. Right now we're on channel 7. And watch for the flashing LEDs in this breakout box. Oh, there's 7 and 15 that are flashing. And we've got activity on the oscilloscope. Alright, so we are communicating with the computer. I got a P0456, which is a small evap leak. And you can see we've got that communication going, reading the data PIDs. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a lot of trouble codes here. Now I'm looking at live data. Well, at that point I buttoned the car back together again, and it drives normally, and the scan tool is working fine. The original code that prompted this was a P0456, and of course that's an evap code that is not an urgency, so I'll deal with that another day. Thanks for watching, you guys.